3 factors factored out. Guess what the first factor was for a successful client-therapist relationship? How about a mutually agreed upon goal? That was number 1. A mutually agreed upon goal was one of the factors. Now, there were 2 other factors, and I'm sure you want to know, so I'm going to go over them right now. The second factor was what's called task agreement, and I'll come back and tell you about that in a moment. And the third factor was good old Rogerian core conditions: a genuineness, unconditional positive regard, and empathy. They always come out. Those good old Rogerian core conditions are so critical to therapeutic outcomes. Let me back up and talk about task agreement. What is task agreement? Task agreement is this. Does the client perceive that what you're talking about in the moment, in the session, is something that's important to them? If the client perceives that the discussion is important to them, at that moment you're on task and you have momentary task agreement. So the mutually agreed upon goal is long-term agreement. The momentary agreement that this is something important to talk about is task agreement. And then you have this relationship of genuineness and empathy and understanding. When you put all those together, that forms a successful client-therapist relationship. So this mutually agreed upon goal is a huge factor in therapeutic outcomes. I'm going to show you a cartoon. This is a joke, but it has a message in it. It's a Beetle Bailey. Everybody knows Beetle Bailey. Been in the comic books for years. Okay, so Beetle is sitting on the psychiatrist's couch, and the psychiatrist says, the Sarge says you don't obey his orders, you talk back to him, and you hide from him. And Beetle says, I thought we were going to talk about my problems. Whose problems are you talking about? Society's problems with the client are the client's problems. This is too often how mental health is conducted, and we're wondering why we get resistance. Next point, why do most people come to therapy? Walter and Peller wrote a very wonderful book I use in my classes on solution-focused brief therapy, and they said this: most people come to therapy because they realized what the solution to the problem was, and they were terrified. They looked at their problem, they looked down the road at what they had to do to solve their problem, and it scared the heck out of them. So I know a lot of your clients are mandated, but if they're not mandated, then they say, I'll go see the therapist, thinking the therapist's got a solution different than the reality of the one that I see, hoping we're going to have a magical solution. But do we have those magical solutions? Unfortunately not. So here's my point. If the solution to the problem is scaring the client, quit focusing on the solution. Back up and manage the fear first. Manage the fear first. The more you focus on the solution, the more you're arousing fear and scaring the heck out of them. And you'll know sometimes you have clients with this situation because you get in these conversations, or these vague, rambling, amorphous conversations that dance around and never become focused. Whenever you get a session like that, you should back way up and ask yourself, hold it, what is this client afraid of? What is scaring them? And then manage the fear first before you go back to it focusing on the solution. Because if you keep focusing on the solution, you're scaring them and you're building resistance. We had a woman that came in our clinic, and this is a rather simple example of this. She talked for 3 or 4 sessions with one of my beginning students, the first client, about how much she hated her husband. I never heard anybody talk so much about how they hated her husband. We thought she was there to get a divorce because she talked about how she hated her husband. And we went, why didn't she get a divorce? Why didn't she get a divorce? Finally, in about the 3rd session, I think, she looks at the therapist and she said, I don't divorce my husband because I got 3 kids, I have no money, I've never worked, I have no job skills, I'll be out on the streets on my own. Whoa, now the problem changed. The solution we thought she was seeking, divorce, wasn't the problem. The problem was the fears of what would happen if she did that solution. Now, most of you would have gotten to that in the 1st session. But this was a beginning counselor, and I just let him sit in there and struggle with this stuff, trying to form up a problem of some type, because if I take that away from it, they're not getting their money's worth in that practicum they have with me. Everybody has to go through that struggle. And by the way, I will give you a technique briefly today, not because of our time factors, that'll show you how to get to the issue behind the issue faster than you normally get there. By the way, sometimes you can just look at your client and say, tell me what you're afraid of. Tell me what's scaring you. Tell me what arouses the hesitancy in you. And they'll tell you what they're afraid of and what they're scared of. Then you try to manage that before you go back here and get that excessive solution focus. Excessive solution focus can arouse a lot of resistance, and we don't realize we're part of that resistance creating equation. Next point, the essential ingredient before we help anyone. I stole this from David Burns. Cognitive therapist, wrote Feeling Good, the New Mood Therapy. Has anybody seen David Burns speak? Haven't seen David Burns. If you like cognitive therapy, go see David Burns. He makes it come alive and work. The problem, he doesn't get out much and do trainings. But if you get a chance, and he's getting older, go see him. He really does a good cognitive therapy training. David Burns, when I saw him, said this: we never help the client until the problem is defined around a specific person, place, and time. Until you have a person, place, and time moment that you and the client can both name, the problem is too broad, too vague, too amorphous, too big, and we're not helpful. Until it gets funneled down to a person, place, and time moment, we're not going to be helpful to the client. I wrote this down when he said it. I went back and, folks, I watch and observe at least over 100 sessions every semester. I have never been able to disprove this. So I'm going to talk about it for a minute more. The client comes in to see you. Do they have one problem? Anybody ever seen a one problem client? No one problem clients? The client comes in and says, well, the dog died, my daughter's pregnant, my son's on drugs, he's busted in jail, my husband's an alcoholic truck driver, he's on the road, I'm having an affair, thinking about getting divorced, my mother's in the nursing home, she's dying, I don't have any money, can you help me? How's that sound? Is that what walks in the door? They're walking over 100 problems. Nobody has seen a one problem client in years in the mental health. So here they are, they walk in the door, and they got all those problems. And by the way, the first time I got a client talking like this, I'm sitting there listening to them, and on the outside, I'm Carl Rogers. Oh, yeah, that's bad. You feel bad. And they said, yes, I feel bad. It's a bad situation. I said, yes, that's a bad situation. And they said, yes, it's a bad situation. I said, I can tell it's a bad situation. On the inside, what was I doing the first time I got a client like that? I was freaking out. Because I'm thinking, oh, my God, these people have a lot of problems. This is the way it was in the textbook. In the textbook, they had those problems solved with one dialogue on one page. Remember that? This is a real client, right? That those people that wrote those textbooks never even seen, I don't think. So they come in with all these problems. Can you solve all those problems at once? No, you can't. Let me show you how to deal with this. Go get some of this stuff. It's called paper. Don't do this without paper. Get paper. Take the problems and put them on the paper, but don't put them all in a nice little row up here. Spread them out. Put space between the problems on the paper. Walk into the client and look and say, look, I've been thinking about you, and this is what I see as problem areas in your life. Let me know if this is correct and get verification. And when they go, yeah, which you'll probably be exactly right, then say, we can't deal with all this at once. I want you to pick the one you want to start on. And that's where we're going to start on, and I'm going to keep you focused there. You let them pick, don't you pick. If you pick, you create resistance. If they pick, there's no resistance. All problems will lead to all problems. Just give it time. I've never seen it fail. Start where the client wants to start and let them pick it out. You have to carve these problems up. I had a student that came in one time. They put a client's name in the center and a circle on the page and drew lines out like an octopus. At the end of every little line, there was a client problem. Looked at that client and said, this is what I see is problems area in your life. And the client went, wow, that's great. And they said, we can't deal with all these at once. You pick where you want to start and we'll start. And the client looked at it and said, that one. They said, okay, this is where we're going to start. I had another one about 2 years ago walk in. I'm going to make the long story short. This young lady's mother had died. She died suddenly. She was real close to her mother. She was away at church camp when the mother died. She's mad at God. The dad's got a new girlfriend. The brothers are scattered. The family's falling apart. And her whole world's falling apart. Now, we knew within the first session that mother's death was the core issue bothering her. But she talked about mother's death and then went off talking about all these other issues in her life. I told my supervisee, I said, I want you to go get a piece of paper and put these problems on there. They put 6 problems on the page, spread out, separate the problems physically on the page. She walked in and looked at the client and said, here are the problem areas that I think I see in your life. Let me know if it's accurate. And the client looked at it and said, oh my God, that's my whole life on one page. That's when you know you're on track. And she said, and we can't deal with all these at once. We want you to pick where to start. Now, mother's death was right here, I remember. And the client pointed down here and said, roommate. And we said, what? Fine, let's talk about roommate. And they talked about roommate for about a session and a half. And then guess where the client went? To mother's death. That first session and a half was testing that therapist, finding out what they have here, building rapport to see if I can go to the tough one. Does that make sense? You put it on paper, you put space between it, you let the client pick, and no matter how insignificant it may seem to you, you go with where they go to. All problems will lead to all problems. You carve it up. So the client comes in, they got a host of problems, you carve it up, and you bring one of these problems area into the room. Now that one problem is going to be made up of a series of person, place, and time events. Now you've got to carve out these person, place, and time events, bring one into the room and funnel it to that moment. Now they've got a point in their life where they can make a choice. Until it reaches that point, it's too big, too broad, too vague, amorphous. Looks like you're getting resistance. You're not getting resistance. You haven't got the problem funneled to a manageable moment. Now that person, place, and time event could be someone 10 years ago that abused this person, could be the husband, wife, the mother, the father, the daughter, the kids, the boss at a particular point of interaction. Could be the client laying in bed at 7 in the morning when the alarm goes off. That's a person, place, and time event in my life. Every day I get up against my own will. But I have a choice right at that moment. What am I going to do? Lay in bed, look at the alarm clock with one eye? Anybody do that besides me? You think, I bet I could lay here another 5 minutes, at least 10, and still be on time. I have a person, place, and time event moment to make a choice. That's a person, place, and time right there. So you've got to get to a person, place, and time event moment with that client. When it's funneled to that point, now they have a point to change behavior, change thinking, change action. And it's at those micro moments of changing action and behavior that clients change. Sometimes, by the way, it's you and the client right now in the session at the moment. Because as all of you know, the way the client interacts with you is the way they interact with the rest of the world. And sometimes we don't have to go out there to get the person, place, and time event. We are part of the person, place, and time event. And so it's happening right here. But you need a person, place, and time event. It needs to be funneled to that point. Anybody do supervision in here? Where are my supervisors? No supervisors? Use this with your supervisees. They come in and they're stuck with their client. You say, do you have a person, place, and time event? Has it been funneled at that point? And chances are no. Well, go back and funnel this problem to a person, place, and time event point. And then they've got a decision point right there. Because until you've reached that point, you're not helpful. And David Burns is right in this. Muddiness is not merely a disturber of prose, it's a destroyer of life or of hope. Clarity is the enemy of resistance. When you get resistance, seek clarity first. Now that's a good quote, but it's not completely true. There is a time to create confusion and muddiness. There's a time to seek clarity. When you have confusion, we want to seek clarity. I will show you later a time to muddy the waters. You have to be careful of these quotes. They might sound good, but they don't always apply in all contexts. Now, let me see something. I have 9:33 or 10:33 up there. Do you want to take a break now? Who's up for a break? Who has to pee? Who wants to do one more thing before we take a break? I'm not getting any hands. I've never seen such an indecisive group. I got one person. Okay, I'm going to do one more section, and then we're going to take a break. All right? And this is I call the perils of assuming a knowing attitude. You're like, if you don't speak up, I can talk for 3 days up here until my little tiny bladder says I got to go. Cut that out. The perils of assuming a knowing attitude. There's an interesting paradox that happens with clients and all clients. They're walking in, do they have one problem? No, they got a host of problems. Remember, dog died, daughter's pregnant, son's on drugs, father's an alcoholic truck driver, he's on the road, I'm having an affair, thinking about getting divorced, my mother's in a nursing home dying, I don't have any money, can you help me? So they have a host of problems, and you keep listening to all these problems, and you start thinking things like this: if they would just do something, somewhere has got to change and improve the situation. Make some change somewhere. But they're going nowhere. And because you're a good person and you're probably right, you start suggesting things that they can do. And when you start suggesting, they look at you and they say, what? Yes, but. And they start yes, butting you when you give your suggestion. What has happened in this therapeutic interaction? What is the dynamic that's going on? Well, I'll tell you what's happened. You have moved into an expert position relative to this client's problem. And they don't want you in an expert position. They're not buying what you're selling. They have sent you a signal. I don't want you in the expert position. And what is that signal? 2 words. Yes, but. Yes, but is saying, you've moved to an expert position, but I don't want you in an expert position, and that's how they let you know. It's not working when you're in that expert position because they're yes-butting you. So you need to get out of this. How do you get out of it? You reverse the paradox. Instead of being an expert, you become naive, puzzled, curious, unknowing. In short, dumbed down. Why? Well, the client cannot resist if you do not give them something to resist against. When you're in the expert position, you're offering them something to resist against. If they're resisting, pull it back. Move to a different position. Why? It's not working. Some people call this the Columbo technique. Everybody know Columbo? Fumbling, bumbling, disheveled detective. Columbo always looked like he didn't know what was going on with the criminal, and he was naive and puzzled, and he'd always get ready to walk out the door. And he's just about out the door, and he said, "Pardon me, sir. I need to ask you just another question for the paperwork down at the office so I don't have to come back. You said you parked your car in that parking lot last night, sir. Is that correct?" "Yes." "Okay. And which space did you park your car, sir?" He's always seeking those little details. To the murderer, Columbo looked like a fumbling, bumbling, disheveled detective that didn't know what was going on because he always came from an unknowing, naive, puzzled position. But Columbo gathered tons of information from the murderer. See, if they're talking, they're working. If you're talking, they're working. If they're explaining to me, they're working. If I'm explaining to them, I'm working. I need them to explain to me. To the murderer, Columbo looked like he was 2 steps behind. In reality, he was 3 steps ahead of the murderer. And he got 3 steps ahead of the murderer by always coming from an unknowing, puzzled, curious position. You reverse the paradox when you get yes-butted. Why? It's not working. How do you know it's not working? Yes, but. Folks, it doesn't matter how much you want to help. It doesn't matter how many good ideas you have, and you probably have very good ideas. What matters is that therapeutic interaction working at the moment? And if you're getting yes-butted, it's not working at the moment. Therefore, change and stop doing it. Get out of the expert position. Quit giving the client something to resist against. If they're not buying what you're selling, quit selling. We're creating resistance.